All right, well, it is an absolutely beautiful, perfect day here in Florida. Clear blue sky, 70 degrees. Man, when the weather's like this, I feel like you can get anything done. So, we are finally today diving into the C6 Z06 Pro drift car vet build. So this is my new comp car build. We bought it as it sits. Didn't do anything to it, pushed it in the garage. It's finally time to start hammering out some work on it because there's a lot of things we need to start doing to figure out if we're gonna do them that way. And if we're gonna do them that way, we need to order other parts to get those parts in time. And we need to make sure we get all the stuff in time. So the first and most important thing we need to get, we're gonna go pick up right now. And we're gonna take the old Pulsar. Perfect freaking day for a cruise in the Pulsar. Let's go for a drive. All right, we're out here at Jayco Plumbing. They somehow work on cars. This is, how many, is this all of your shop? How many of you split this place?
It's really just me and Matt.
Okay.
And then Steve's been, helping out, doing some stuff
Okay.
here as well.
So Matt and Steve's shop was formerly Matt and Marco's shop. We are borrowing Matt's G-Force GSR trans and QuickTime bell housing. If I do the front trans in the vet, this is the exact same setup I would use. I love QuickTime stuff and I'd want to use a GSR. So we literally have the exact same setup that I would buy to run in the car, to borrow and test fit. So huge shout out to Matt the Ginge for letting me do this. Thing's still in the box and this guy's letting me take it out of the box and test fit it in my car. Like, props to Matt, I appreciate you. So we're gonna try to throw this thing in the Pulsar, see if it fits. No problem. We didn't have to take the rear strut bar off. That thing's always in the way of putting stuff in the trunk. Man, it's been nice. It's boost weather. I haven't driven this car in a bit, man. I'm having a great time. Just driving to go pick up a trans. So fun. All right, we're heading back to the house / shop now. Let's work on getting the bed in. Trying to put this trans in. Really curious to see how this goes. This is a big decision and a big factor in the build is whether or not this is going to work. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I guess there is a lot of room to the floor pan. All right, we got the vet back up on the lift. I haven't seen this thing on the lift since we got it, so it's fun to look under it again now that we've gone through so many different iterations of how we are gonna build this thing out. So again, what we're working on now is the transmission setup. So this is the way it's currently set up, and this is the stock vet setup. So you have a bell housing and then a torque tube. So this is basically has a spline shaft in it and then bearings, runs all the way back here, boom, mates up with our transmission. And then our transmission is mated straight to the differential in a transaxle configuration. So instead of our transmission being up here by the engine, it is back here. And now the benefit of this is weight distribution, getting the car closer to 50-50. The difficulty is when you get into a competition drift car specifically, you run into some problems. So the options for transmissions for this are limited because of that. So option A, get this transmission built. RPM Transmission does a faceplating service. So they basically turn it internally into a race transmission, and they build the diffs as well, and then boom, you've got a built trans, should handle the power that we're gonna throw at it. You really need to brace the trans to the diff, they can break apart and so on and so forth, but for the most part, it should handle the power. Now the problem is, we would be stuck with a fixed rear end ratio. We could pick whatever we wanted when we have it all built, but that's it. We can't change it unless we pull the whole diff out, which This is not like a lot of cars where you can just yank the diff out in 5 minutes. No, it's an ordeal to pull the differential out of this thing. So that is why I have chosen not to go with that option, because for drifting, especially competing and starting to get into the higher levels, we need gear changeability. We need to use what's called a winner's quick change, which allows you to pull the back cover off and easily swap gear ratios. And the reason for that is because then we can put a lot of grip in the car, but dial in the wheel speed to where basically we have the wheel spinning just fast enough to get through the track, but can put as much grip in it for the power level. We can really dial in the car a lot better than just having to compromise on a gear that's either too long or too short. So ideally, we want a quick change. Now, there is another option to keep this set up. RTS makes a billet, it's called the 6XD, billet 6-speed sequential transmission that mounts to a winner's quick change. It all stays in the rear. It uses an upgraded torque tube, keeps the Vette as the Corvette gods intended it, rear transmission. That's how the car was designed. It keeps the weight balance. It keeps all those things. Very, very nice setup. 2 problems. 1, that transmission is expensive, very expensive. The transmission alone is like $18,000, $20,000. So that's a tough pill to swallow. I don't really feel there's a huge need for a sequential in drifting, so on and so forth. The other problem, and really the more pressing problem, serviceability. So that's GM stuff. A lot of it has an internal throwout bearing that's also your slave cylinder. So your hydraulic fluid goes to that. Now, as a lot of you probably know, slave cylinders can go out. Throwout bearings can go out. If you needed to get to either of those things or the clutch, more extreme, you have to pull all of this out. This whole rear assembly, literally from the torque tube all the way back, suspension, everything. All of this has to come out. That's not ideal in a situation where you're at a comp weekend working on the car in the pits and you need to change something. It's going to take a lot longer than pulling just the transmission out. So that is why we were trying this option. And we're not committed to it yet. Fortunate enough, again, to have Matt let us borrow this before we pull the trigger on it. So again, huge thank you to him. It's so nice that we're going to be able to test this theory. So this is a just normal race transmission and a QuickTime bell housing for it that is going to go in the front right behind the engine like it would be in most cars. Now, is there enough room to fit it? Is there going to be enough room to run things like exhaust afterwards, so on and so forth? That's really what we're here to figure out. There's a few people who are working on doing this. There's, from what I understand, a couple people who have done it, but there's not a lot of info on it yet, and I really want to see with my own eyes what does this look like. So let me get this trans out of the box, and so I can look at it, and so you can look at it, and then we'll start seeing how it all is going to look up there. This thing is small, dude. One thing I want to do is weigh it. A, out of curiosity. 2, out of curiosity for Ben. He's trying to decide what transmission setup he wants to go with, and weight is a big factor. So let's find out. These are the only scales I have, so this is what we're using. Zeroed out. 80 pounds exactly. It is always pretty wild to me how small and light these transmissions are, considering how much power and abuse they handle. But I mean, it makes sense because it's a stripped down, simplified version of a transmission. Straight cut gears, no synchros, just basically the bare minimum, 4-speed. These transmissions being so small and light is what makes the idea of putting this trans in the front of this car feasible. We are shifting the weight forward, but it's going to weigh less than a rear trans that we could use. So there's pros and cons. I could keep jibber-jabbering on about it, but let's get it up on the trans jack and just kind of push it up there and get an idea of if it's like not even close, if it's reasonably close, how much we have to cut, so on and so forth. All right, before we try to get this trans up here, we're going to have to pull this exhaust out. At least this section. Oh, 4-inch, pretty heavy. All right, cool. That's out of the way. Let's get the trans up here. Well, like I said, the point right now is just general idea. Are these wings gonna fit with this bracing? Are we gonna have to notch or completely remove that bracing? How much room are we really gonna have here? Is it gonna slide right in with minimal cutting? It's almost looking that way. The front wings allow in right back here. Looking a little tight. Man, that almost looks like it'll fit. So this is the area I was kind of concerned about. You know, this is realistically the widest part of the trans, the faceplate right here, and these braces. So all these threaded holes are where normally there's a plate that bolts on that goes all the way down, and that protects the torque tube from the heat of the exhaust, and I would assume adds structural rigidity, but I'm thinking we're gonna have to cut those out. We might still have enough room to run an exhaust under it without too much headache. It's looking promising. So really, before we can go any further, we need to go ahead and get the trans and torque tube and bell housing. We need to get all of this out of the way, and then we can start mocking it up a little better. And if we want to go for it, we can go ahead and start cutting and get it fit and order one. So enough jibber jabber. Let's get back to work. Van said, peace out. Cool dry brakes. I definitely need to consider investing in dry brake disconnects for brake lines. If you're not familiar with what a dry brake is, basically the reservoir is still up here. We disconnect that and it holds the fluid in. So you can have a fluid line and keep everything bled, basically. Pretty nifty. All right, knock out the other side, and then I think we're a step frame bolts away from skating it out. Out. All right, well, this is why we are trying to run front trans. As you can see, this is it's a whole lot to pull out. Now, granted, you can pull the trans setup out and leave the torque tube in, but if you're trying to get to the throwout bearing or the clutch, you got to pull all this out. I think to get to the throwout bearing, you could take just these bolts off, pull the torque tube, leave the bell housing, but it's an ordeal, as you can see. So now we can start test fitting the new trans. I definitely am 90% of the way there as far as running this setup, especially after that project. Like, ain't no way we're doing that at the track. I mean, we could, but whew, not gonna be fun. Thing too, we have to keep in mind is it not only has to fit, but we have to be able to take it in and out. If we can't, then it defeats the whole purpose. But it's looking promising. We might have room for exhaust after all, too. But we are going to have to do some cutting. We will resume this tomorrow when we have daylight and less mosquitoes. And we're going to get this thing in there. So we've got 2 points of concern. The very top is probably going to hit the top of the trans tunnel before we're lined up. That's problem 1. Problem 2 is the shifter. So as you can see, the shifter's hitting. I don't want to cut open the shifter area yet because I really would like to get a little bit further setback than this to get it kind of somewhere near stock, but I need to sit in there again and get an idea of, I'd rather have it a little forward, but I just don't want to cut it up and then have a different shifter and it be cut way too wide. But then again, we could cut it, plate it, I don't know. Debating. Okay, moving on. Biggest thing was the exhaust, and I think we are good there. As you can see, the trans narrows up well before the tunnel area narrows up. We should definitely be able to squeeze 3-inch piping past there. Mind you, this is going to go up another 3 inches or so. So we should have plenty of room to get by. Now the trans mount and exhaust going to be a little difficult, but then again, we'll probably go to the floor. That might not be so bad either. Yeah, this is really looking a lot more feasible. The exhaust was my biggest question mark. Would we have room to run an exhaust? And I think we will, no problem. So the problem is though, like I said, I can't put it all the way up in there yet unless I cut out a giant hole for the shifter, which, do I want to commit to that yet? I don't know. But what I want to do is drop it down, go ahead and put the bell housing on and see how that fits. And the reason I don't want to just, oh man, that goes down fast. I don't want to just take this shifter off is because it comes from RTS all safety wired and perfectly set up. You know, all these are marked and whatever, just so that everything's correct, right? So I'm not going to go taking this thing apart and then it not be correct. So let's see what we can do. Let's get the bell housing in here first before we get ahead of ourselves. All right, so this is the exact same bell housing we'll be using from QuickTime. The cool thing about these bell housings is they're SFI rated, meaning if your clutch explodes, it might be okay. Well, that most certainly fits. A couple bolts in here just so she don't fall off on us. So one other thing I thought about was moving the engine back since we can, since we'll be having a drive shaft, not a torque tube, but it's not looking plausible. Those top 2 bolts are going to be a bit difficult to get to. So we may want to consider cutting this top one out too. I'm going to add a piece of aluminum back in here to tie this back together. It'll just be flat instead of raised. Obviously won't be as strong, but I think we'll be okay with the cage, and we'll try to do some additional bracing. But the bell housing fits with plenty of clearance. Plenty of clearance. Now we just gotta figure out what to do about that pesky shifter. All right, I got the car down. Been kind of sitting in it to get an idea of where I want to be. The seat is already all the way back. We could take out this bar down there, part of this bar structure that we don't technically need, and move it back a little bit more, but there's kind of a lot of stuff in the way. For all intents and purposes, this is as far back as the seat's gonna go. Column feels to be in the right spot. Everything seems okay so far, but I wanna go ahead and put the pedal box in, get an idea of where that lands, and then determine if we need to move the seat up or back, which will determine if we need the shifter back or forward or wherever. So let's put the pedal box in. Be cool to see what it looks like anyway. Got to go up. This is a little bit on the tight side, if anything. Okay, after putting the pedal box in here, if anything, the seat needs to go back further, which means that shifter offset definitely not going to work, because that shifter offset is already, you know, at the front of this shifter cutout. So we're really going to want to be somewhere about in the middle, honestly. That'll be about right. Shifter to... We definitely don't want to be, you know, up here having to really reach for it. I want to be somewhere like that. All right, good to know. So we will have to do a different shifter offset. I need to measure, figure out what that one is, and see if we can get a longer offset. All right, so the shifter offset here measures out at 24 inches. We can go as far as 26, which should probably put us about where we need to be. All right, this is something I did want to check as well. Obviously with the bell housing on, we can't go straight up, right? Like where it's gonna sit. We're gonna have to go up and in, and there creates another clearance issue with this lip. Now, since we already cut that lip out, and we're probably not gonna be using this brace, not really a big deal to cut it out, so we're just gonna cut that out real quick, and that should give us enough room. Might have to do some hammering, a little more massaging, one step at a time though. All right, we are real close to getting this in there. As you can see, we're still a couple inches low, but that's purely because of the shifter. So I'm gonna go ahead and open this up, because even if we have a further setback, we're still gonna have to cut it over this way some. It's not gonna be all the way to the left, because the shifter is centered on this trans versus being offset like it is on the torque tube. So either way, we're gonna have to cut that a little bit. Might as well just cut it, plate over it later, you know, and put our hole in the exact spot, because we're gonna have to plate that up. So we might as well just cut it a little bit. We'll plate it later. I wanna make this fit. We are so freaking close. But this is, you know, me getting it up in there. So it's a little tight back here, but it widens up. So if you kind of put it up in at an angle, it's really not bad at all. I mean, I think I could freaking deadlift this thing over my head and put it in by myself if I knew it was gonna go in. So anyway, I'm gonna drop it back down, go up top, cut that open, and then we'll try this again. Test, fit, cut, repeat. All right, well, it's close. It's really, really close. You can see we're just a couple inches down at most, and I can push it up a little bit. Basically, the shifter assembly, linkage assembly, is hitting the top of the tunnel. So we need to cut out the top of the tunnel to clear the shifter linkage, and obviously then remake the top of the tunnel, just basically raise it up. Now that brings us to a different question mark. Let me drop this thing down and I'll explain. So if you're unfamiliar with dog box race transmissions, there's a couple types, main two types. You have top loaders like this, where the shifter is in the center, the shift linkage basically comes in from the top. Or you have a side shift transmission, so the shifter is like here, right? Basically next to the tail housing, and there's two linkages that go, and it basically shifts the gears from the side. Those transmissions, the side shifts, are about half the cost for roughly the same thing. You know, these transmissions are around $8,000. You can find a nice side shift for about $4,000. And the reason for that is because they don't really fit in anything. These fit in our road cars. Those were designed for race cars, you know, stock cars and so on and so forth, where obviously they could put the shifter kind of wherever they wanted. So that's the big downfall, is the shifter, boom, not in the normal spot. Now, my thought is, if I have to cut the trans tunnel out anyway for the shift linkage up top, what's the difference cutting it out on the side? The vet, it's already offset to the driver's side. It might not be too far further to the left to get a side shift in here. Be significantly cheaper, which I mean would be nice if we could buy two of them for the same price as one of those, and they're roughly the same thing internally. It's just different shifting mechanism. It's definitely a thought. So luckily, man, I have good friends. Showman has a side shift trans, and I'm gonna go pick it up sometime this week and try to toss it in there and see what it looks like before we kind of make a final verdict on this and start cutting. Either way, I'm good with the front trans. We've already cut enough stuff out of the way. Might as well send it. I'm happy with everything else though. I'm happy with how much room we're gonna have for the exhaust. I don't think there'll be a problem snaking dual 3-inch through there, which was, again, one of my biggest concerns. I wanted to make sure the exhaust stays above the floor pan. That's important. So the bell housing is going to be a little interesting. It hangs a little bit below the floor pan. As you can see, it's round. The engine sits really low in the Vette. And the factory bell housing, I honestly didn't notice this until looking at that one, is flat on the bottom. So yeah, that's something we might have to address. We might have to cut that lip off the bottom just to give us a little more clearance. But it's not unreasonably low. Just I like to keep things as tucked up as high as possible, so the body or the frame rails are the first thing that scrapes, not the exhaust or the trans or any of that stuff. But I mean, the trans in my Miata hangs super low because it's a freaking V8 and a Miata. So you're always going to deal with those problems. But if we can get two dual 3-inch exhaust through here without it hanging below the floor pan, or, you know, maybe a 1/2 inch, that was my biggest thing. And I'm happy to know that we're good there. So I'm good with moving forward with this. Either way, I think we're going to go ahead and call it. Not much more we can do until we get that trans, try it and decide. Probably go ahead and break this down, get this out of the subframe so I can at least put the subframe back in the car and make the car a roller again. But anyway, I'll take care of that later. For now, I think I'm going to go ahead and end it out. I hope to see you guys next time. Hopefully we can knock out a little more work on this thing before we get back to the turbo truck. That way we have everything squared away. That's the big thing. I want to make sure I have all the things I need to order figured out and at least ordered with how long parts of delays are right now. There will be things we miss. There will be things we forget. But hopefully if we can get the bulk of it on the way, we'll be in good shape to get this car done by next season. So yeah, anyway, hope to see you guys next time. For now, that's it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Goodbye.